Now we're going to go to our regular Monday feature with CBS News chief political consultant Mark Amender, who's here with his weekly look at what we're supposed to pay attention to in politics. Mark, the big story, of course, coming out of the weekend was Senator Bob Bennett of Utah. What happened?
An incumbent Republican senator was essentially defeated by the organizing prowess of the Tea Party movement in Utah. Robert Bennett, who has served 3 terms in the Senate, who's popular among regular Republican voters of the state, was ousted in this convention process, which allows activists essentially to magnify their own power and can essentially allow a couple hundred people to determine the course of a primary election. And there are 2 Tea Party endorsed candidates who will face off in the June 22nd what most people consider actual primary in Utah. The question now is whether Senator Bennett, who is quite unrepentant in the votes that he took, and let's just remind people, the reason why he drew so much ire is because he supported the TARP bailout. The Club for Growth in Washington really didn't like that and ran lots of ads against him. And then he dared to work with Senator Ron Wyden for a couple of weeks, early on in the health care debate, early on what would have been a bipartisan health care bill.
Right, seen consorting with Democrats.
You can't do that. I mean, it's you know, dead girl, live boy, or Democrats. It really is in the Republican Party at this time. So the question for Bennett now is whether he tries to run on his name, which would mean that he asks voters to write him in on the ballot, which is possible, very, very tough to do, and in all likelihood, Bennett will be the first casualty, real major casualty of all of this anti-Washington, anti-incumbent, anti-party fervor in the Republican Party.
So we've now got the Bennett story, we've got the Chris story in Florida,
yep.
We've got a potential story along these lines happening in Kentucky. So give me your sense. Are we looking at dots that need to be connected? Are they just 3 individual results that are associated with this larger Tea Party movement, but also very local, because everybody's going to want to draw this into a huge national story about the Republican Party?
I think there are a couple of ways to look at it, and I don't think, though, you can entirely isolate this to the Republican Party, because Congressman Jim Matheson also faced a particularly spirited challenge from his left at the convention, the Democratic convention in Utah, and now is going to have to face a state representative on June 22nd as well, who ran against him for his votes on health care. You're seeing, for example, in a district in northern West Virginia, Alan Mollahan, who's been a long-term member of Congress, is facing a challenge within the Democratic Party from his right. It's probably, this is tomorrow's election, it's going to be close. You may have Arlen Specter next week defeated by Congressman Joe Sestak from his left. So it's hard
Kendrick
to
Meek being from the left,
from
I guess,
the left,
in Florida.
Right, in Florida, from a very rich billionaire who got his money by shorting the housing market, shorting subprime mortgages in particular. Clearly, there are a couple of things to isolate. One is anti-Washington sentiment and anti-party sentiment that you're seeing on both sides, whereas the party is out of touch with the average people. And it's also, I think, the ability, though, of groups to organize without the apparatus of the parties, which is a trend you've been seeing since at least 2004 on the Democrats. You're seeing finally this year among Republicans.
Tell me what else, quickly before we go, what else is happening in politics we should be paying attention to?
You know, there's quite a lot going on. Just this morning, the Democratic congressional campaign election threw up its hands and said, no mas. We're essentially no longer putting much... we're no longer essentially contesting Hawaii's 1st congressional district. This is a special election to replace retiring Congressman Neil Abercrombie. This is President Obama's home district, the district where he grew up in, and was born in and grew up in. It's a district the Democrats will probably win back in November. But there are 2 Democrats right now running and 1 Republican, and 2 Democrats are going to split the vote. The White House tried to force one of the Democrats out of the race, didn't work. Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee has already spent $300,000 on this race, but they've said we're not going to spend another penny, which means that the Republican, Charles Zhao, is probably going to win. Republicans finally winning a House special election. Pyrrhic victory because 5 months later Democrats are probably going to retake the seat, but it's going to provide some momentum from Republicans.
One very quick question on the end. Back to the Specter race.
Sure.
Obama's role in it now, as we're getting this 1 week, what role is the president going to play?
Well, you know, last week I asked the question, is Obama going to campaign for Specter? Because when Specter became a Democrat, there were clearly negotiations behind the scenes about what would happen if Specter were primaried from the left. Would the White House take a risk and campaign for Specter? I was told, yeah, you should expect the president to go campaign for Specter.
Yeah, they wanted to get that.
They wanted to get that. However, as it became clear over the weekend, the race is not only very close. There's a good chance that Congressman Joe Sestak, will beat Arlen Specter. And if you're the White House and you believe there's a chance for either of the two candidates to beat the Republican, whose name is Pat Toomey, who's run before in Pennsylvania, which is, I think, a reasonable assumption, you don't want to anger Democrats in Pennsylvania. You have to calculate, well, is it worth perhaps breaking our promise, Senator Specter, if we're going to lose a Senate seat? So as of this morning, the question I asked is it a sure thing that President Obama is going to Pennsylvania? And not so sure.
Oh, that's great. Thanks, Mark. We'll see what happens next Monday.
Indeed.